Hello, it's Matt Thomas from King & Eek, and I'm here looking at the Arturia CMI for Sonic Academy. Those of you who know your historical instruments might be thinking that Arturia CMI looks an awful lot like a Fairlight CMI, because it is. So the reason we're looking at the Fairlight is that, along with the synth it revolutionised electronic music making by being the first sampler to hit the market. Now, the impact of sampling pretty much changed music production and the music that was created overnight. So we're going to look at the history of this instrument and how it came to be. If you're only interested in how to use it, you can skip out now, just pop on to the next chapter, and I'll be talking a lot of useful stuff there, whereas here it'll be lots of historic bibble, and you can enjoy my voice. So those of you who enjoy historic bibble, or indeed the sound of my voice, you should stay here, otherwise nip on. So the Fairlight story starts in Sydney, Australia in the early 70s. Two guys, Peter Vogel and Kim Ryrie. Kim Ryrie had set up a magazine called Electronics Today International, and it was a magazine full of electronics projects for nerds and wizards of that sort. And one of the things it included was a semi-modular synth you could build yourself called the ETI 4600. If you ever see one of these, they're always handmade. They were never kind of put in production. It was just a kit that you could follow his instructions, go out and buy the parts. Kind of similar to a VCS3 in that it uses a patch matrix with pins in rather than patch cords. So it got that done, and he came up with the idea of potentially doing a commercial synthesizer. So he contacted his mate Peter Vogel, who was also an electronics whiz, and pitched this idea that they'd try and do a synth with an analog architecture, but maybe with digital control of the parameters, which is kind of what the Rhodes Chroma and, to an extent, the Prophet 5 ended up being. But this is the early 70s, and so the race to get polysynth on the market is still on. So to that end, Ryrie and Vogel formed Fairlight Instruments in 1975. But they end up meeting a guy called Tony Furs in 1976. So Tony Furs has been working since 1972 on a series of fully digital synth prototypes based around Motorola microprocessors. These were the Quasar, Quasar 2 and the Quasar M8. Digital synths at this point were entirely super ahead of the curve prototype stuff you're only really finding in big university research departments. So this was futuristic stuff. Briefly, all three collaborated before Ryrie and Vogel decided to license Furs' technology, and they created the Fairlight Quasar M8 CMI, which is a mouthful. However, the machine still wasn't achieving the level of real-time control over transients and harmonics that they intended. So, in their own words, they cheated by digitally recording a real-world sound and replaying it. So the very first sampled Fairlight sound was one of their dogs barking. If you're an Orb fan, I think it might be Towers of Dub, one of the early Orb tracks, has a dog woofing, which is from that Fairlight sample. And it also has a line from the Woody Allen movie Sleeper, where he's got a crap robot dog, which says, "Woof, woof, woof, hello, I'm Rags." So that's the joke, you see, they're both robot dogs. You see the sample there? Interesting, eh? So that's why that's in there. So they recorded this dog, and I went, bloody hell, that works. I'm not sure they actually swore. Maybe they said, "Struth, that works." But no, let's not do accents. So they said that works. So recognising there might be something in this approach, they added digital recording as a feature, and the Fairlight computer musical instrument was born. So this was 1979, and Series 1 got you an 8-bit sampler with a 24 kHz sampling rate and 8 voice of poly. It had the light pen and the monitor from Furs' Quasar design. The actual guts of the system was a big 40 kilogram rack box full of audio processing cards. It had a couple of 8-inch floppy drives, and a big 6-octave keyboard, which had 3 assignable sliders and 2 switches that you could control most of the parameters in the system from. This system was debuted at a number of the music fairs around the world, and it got a mixture of reactions, pretty much from amazement to bemusement. People could see it was incredible, but they weren't quite sure what it was going to be used for. It really didn't take long for a lot of forward-thinking artists at that time to grab a hold of one. Peter Gabriel in the UK was one of the first people to see one, and kept it in his studio for a week on demo, and was so impressed he went on to form a company to import them into Europe. Through that company, people like Kate Bush, John Paul Jones out of Led Zeppelin, all the kind of rock glitterati, huge big names at the time, began getting their hands on them. 1982 saw the Series 2. Sampling was upgraded to 32 kHz sample rate, but most importantly it added Page R. Now all the different features in the software of the Fairlight were organised by pages, and Page R was the one which had the first ever graphical pattern sequencer, which is really the grandfather of the classic DAW piano roll we all use today. Bear in mind that prior to that you had analog sequencers where you were very hands-on, which is great when you want that, but you're essentially setting knobs and dials. Whereas here suddenly you were effectively using a touch screen via the light pen and just punching in notes into an 8-track sequence that you could see visually in front of you. It really pretty much transformed the making of music from that point onwards. 1983 saw the Series 2X, which had a MIDI and SMPTE and updated the processors and the hardware. And then 1985, finally the Series 3, which is what we would consider to be now a kind of base standard of what you need a sampler to be, i.e. 16-bit. It had 50 kilohertz stereo sampling frequency, 16-note polyphonic, it had a hard drive, and it also came with a new sequencer, CAPS, which was the Composer Arranger Performer sequencer. The minute Fairlight got there was pretty much around the same time that Ensoniq and Akai began making this stuff for fractions of the same money. So while they had absolutely captured the market, with some going to Synclavier but most going to Fairlight in the first half of the 80s, that rapidly changed and the cheaper alternatives began to capture far more of the market share. Certainly the Fairlight had all the Rolls-Royce features, it had this wonderful interface, but when all said and done, if the choice is paying 15 times more or paying 15 times less and having to work a little bit harder but have the same amount of polyphony, the same amount of sampling, people were just pretty much happy to go with the cheaper option. So from then on, Fairlight focused on the post-production market and they began making the MFX models. Now those still contain the sort of guts of a CMI functionality, but really they're aimed at post-prod broadcast work for TV and film. So they're kind of a Fairlight, but not necessarily one that jumps out at being a musical instrument. Now moving swiftly on, we come to where we are today, where lots of these classic instruments are being reimagined in virtual digital forms. And the same has been true for Fairlight. It's never really lost its Rolls-Royce sheen. So there is Fairlight iOS app, and there was even an attempt at resurrecting original Fairlight hardware. Peter Vogel offered for a while the chance to buy brand new original spec Fairlights, so not a kind of an upgraded new version, but a classic sort of Series 2, Series 3 era Fairlight with all the foibles but all the sound, because it does have a particular sound to it, as almost all instruments do. But they were going to be in this sort of 20 grand region, so clearly you had to really want one of these things. But it was an absolutely mint nick, completely brand new machine. However, there's been some dispute between various holders of the Fairlight name, and that currently is back off the cards again. Similar things have happened with the iOS Fairlight. Sometimes it's on the Apple Store, sometimes it isn't. So there's some dispute there as to who is the person that can sell Fairlight at this point. Nonetheless, what we have in front of us is the Arturia CMI, which is based very much, of course, on the concepts of the Fairlight, includes the Page R idea, and is introducing the Fairlight to a whole new generation of music makers. Now, normally on these history intros, I do a big spiel about the most important artists that used it, but I really wouldn't have the time. I could probably start talking now, rolling out names. We'll be here the rest of the afternoon, me going around, and then there was Thingy used it, and Queen used it, and then them used it. It would take forever. So to encapsulate, just give you a slight idea of how influential an instrument the Fairlight was. In 2006, Fairlight donated a CMI keyboard to a charity organisation called Witness, who auctioned it off and raised $100,000. Now, the reason it pulled in that much cash, what is clearly a quite antiquated sampler, was all the keys had been signed by famous users or owners. Those people included Annie Lennox, Barry Gibb from the Bee Gees, Bono, Boris Blanc from Yellow, Brian Eno, Brian Wilson, David Bowie, Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd, Elvis Costello, Hans Zimmer, Howard Jones, Jean-Michel Jarre, Jan Hammer, J.J. Jexlick from Martin Noise, John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin, Kate Bush, Laurie Anderson, Lindsey Buckingham from Fleetwood Mac, Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits, Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo, Midge Ure from Midge Ure, and also Ultravox, Mike Oldfield, also of Mike Oldfield fame, Mike Rutherford from Genesis, Peter Gabriel, Roland Orsbaugh from Tears for Fears, George Martin, I'm not sure what he did, I think he produced some band called the Bootles or something, Stevie Wonder, Stuart Copeland from the Police, Thomas Dolby, and this dude called Trevor Horn, who apparently made every single hit record in the 80s with one of these things. And that's just a small sampling of people who've used this machine. Prince, Quincy Jones, we could be here for days. There are so many records you could listen to. I mean, Planet Rock, start of hip-hop, one of these things. Totally rewrites music and how it's made and what it's used for. One of my personal favourites, I wouldn't say it was the most influential use of a Fairlight, but it certainly gives you an impression of how it unlocked the capacity to do something that could not have been done before. Have a listen to Jean-Michel Jarre's Zulu album, particularly the first track, Ethnicolor. It's almost like cheesy in its over-the-top use of samples, but it's also, there's nothing else had gone before it which could have sounded like that. And it just gives you an idea of how it must have felt at that moment when people got their hands on technology and went, what, I can record sounds in, like, and just play them. No. What? Really? And maybe that kind of that astonishment, that sort of freedom has kind of got lost now. We all kind of know that samplers are great at going, house music. And that's about it. Whereas the first use of samplers seem to be really kind of like, well, the sky's the limit. And so hopefully, if you get to learn this Fairlight, you might kind of think, okay, I'm going to try and get my head in that place, really play with a sampler, not just chop up audio or MIDI, but actually learn a sampler, play with it, and see where it takes me.